Margaret Reynolds sat straight-backed in the cold leather chair at First Heritage Bank, the wall clock ticking away Tuesday afternoon at 3:15. Her wrist bore the watch George had given her on their 40th wedding anniversary, its gold band loose around her thinning skin. Across the polished oak table, her daughter Elaine, 35, immaculate in an expensive pastel dress, smiled with practiced charm while explaining the simple paperwork to the young bank clerk. Beside her, Derek, Elaine's husband of 10 years, maintained a respectful facade for the security cameras, his cologne expensive and cloying in the recycled air. Beneath the table, Derek's fingers dug into Margaret's arm like steel clamps, leaving red marks on her papery skin. "Hurry up, Margaret," he whispered, his voice honeyed poison against her ear. "Don't make this harder than necessary." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, each minute stretching as Margaret stared at the transfer form. $30,000. Her entire remaining savings after George's death 3 years ago. The ink on the signature line waited dark and final. "Mom, just sign here." Elaine's voice carried the same sweet persuasion she'd used as a child, begging for candy money. But at 35, her eyes held calculation instead of innocence. "It's just routine, a small transfer to sort out some paperwork." But Margaret knew the truth. There was nothing routine about emptying her account. This wasn't a small transfer, it was everything. The last of her widow's pension. The final remains of 46 years of marriage and careful saving. "Think of Sophie," Derek murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "Think of your granddaughter's future." The irony burned in Margaret's throat. She was the one who had paid for Elaine's college. She was the one who had given them the house down payment. She was the one who had covered Derek's debts when he lost his job last year, $20,000 they never repaid. Margaret's mind drifted back through the years to simpler times with George. Evenings at the kitchen table, counting bills, planning their future cent by cent. George meticulously recording every expense in his leather-bound ledger, sometimes skipping lunch to add to their retirement fund. His careful handwriting mapping out their golden years together, years he never lived to see. The memories shifted to financial turning points, each one a small wound that had gradually formed the great fracture in her life. The emerald pendant, her grandmother's only remaining treasure from Ireland, sold to pay for Elaine's summer camp when she was 15, $3,000 that could have been an heirloom instead became 3 weeks of horseback riding and tennis. "It's my dream, Mom," Elaine had pleaded, her teenage eyes brimming with tears. "Everyone from school is going. I'll be the only one left out." Then came college. Margaret and George sitting in the mortgage office, his hand trembling as he signed away their home's equity to finance Elaine's education at Westlake Private University. $160,000 that could have secured their retirement instead became a degree in business administration that Elaine barely used. "State school isn't good enough, Mom," Elaine had insisted. "My friends would laugh." The memories continued their relentless parade. Margaret standing in the bank office withdrawing $40,000 from her retirement fund for Elaine and Derek's house down payment. The bank officer's gentle warning, "Once you withdraw these funds, there's no turning back." The 10% early withdrawal penalty, $4,000 lost forever. "It's an investment, Mom," Elaine had promised. "We'll pay back every penny with interest." Then came the groceries at discount stores, buying beans and rice to save money while Derek called asking for $20,000 to pay off debts after losing his job. Margaret pushing her cart down aisles with flickering lights, calculating how to stretch each dollar while planning to give away what little security she had left. The memory of tea with David Evans surfaced unexpectedly. George's old friend with silver hair and wise eyes sitting in her living room 6 months ago, placing his cup down with deliberate care. "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you about Derek. He didn't lose his job because of a racist boss, as he claims. I have friends on the board of that company. Derek was caught embezzling from the corporate fund they gave him the option to resign instead of pressing charges." She had stared at David, unable to process the information, then dismissed the warning, too afraid of hurting Elaine, too afraid of rocking the boat, too afraid of being alone. The bank's air conditioning raised goosebumps on Margaret's arms, bringing her back to the present moment. Sophie's face floated in her mind, 8 years old, with blonde curls and intelligent blue eyes so unlike her calculating mother. The only genuine joy in Margaret's life now. She remembered stroking Sophie's hair while the child sang her newly learned piano pieces, proudly holding up crayon drawings. "I made you big because your love is big, Grandma," Sophie had explained, pointing to the enormous figure with outstretched arms. But even those precious moments had been tainted. Margaret had slowly realized that each of Sophie's visits came with a special request that Elaine had coached her to make. "Grandma, could you help me go to piano camp? Mommy says it will change my life." The innocent voice had been trained to perfection, but behind those clear eyes, Margaret could hear Elaine's words. Behind Sophie stood Derek, watching the scene like a financial product to be assessed. The memory of George's final days pierced through everything else. The long nights changing the dressings on his diabetic ulcers, calculating medication costs $400 monthly that insurance only partially covered. Standing in the hospital cafeteria employee locker room staring at her swollen feet with protruding veins, then forcing them back into painful shoes for her second shift of the day. Elaine and Derek visited the hospital only twice during George's 3-year illness, always with excuses. Sophie has a recital, Derek has an important meeting, but the calls for money never stopped. Then came that final morning, George holding Margaret's hand in the pale hospital light, his skin bluish under the fluorescence. "I love you, Maggie," he had whispered, using the nickname only he ever used. "Promise me you'll start living for yourself." His last breath had been as light as a butterfly's wing, and Margaret felt half her soul departing with him. 46 years, she had thought, looking at her tarnished wedding band. 46 years, and now what am I supposed to do? She had sat in silence, still holding his hand as nurses quietly entered the room. 2 months after the funeral, Margaret had been sorting through medical records and hospital bills when the phone rang. Elaine's calling voice choked with tears. "Mom, Derek lost his job. His boss hated him. We're going to lose the house. Sophie will have to change schools." Margaret had sat at her kitchen table with $50,000 in life insurance money, everything she had left for the rest of her life. On the wall hung George's handmade financial planning board, medications $400 month, food $300 month. How carefully he had calculated everything. She had agreed to give them $20,000 with the promise, 6 months maximum, and I'll get every penny back. Months later, waiting for Elaine to pick up Sophie after a sleepover, Margaret had noticed Elaine's phone forgotten on the kitchen counter vibrate with an incoming message. She hadn't meant to look, but Derek's name on the screen alongside the visible text caught her eye. "Has Mother Dearest transferred the money yet? Need to make the Mexico vacation deposit by Friday." With trembling hands, she had opened the message, her heart pounding as she read the entire conversation. More messages appeared, revealing plans to use her money for a luxury vacation, not saving their house as claimed. When Elaine returned, Margaret had placed the phone down and asked directly, "You're using my money for a trip to Mexico?" Elaine had frozen, then anger flashed across her face. "You read my messages. How could you violate my privacy like that?" Margaret had found herself backing away, her lifelong habit of conflict avoidance taking over. Elaine had seen the hesitation and capitalized on it. "Don't you understand we need this vacation to decompress from our financial stress? It's the only way Derek can focus on finding a new job." Her voice had softened, returning to the role of the good daughter. "Don't you want Sophie to have a good life? Don't you love us?" Margaret, despite knowing she was being manipulated, had felt guilt rising like a tide. "I'm sorry for looking at your phone," she had said, hating herself for the weakness. Elaine had embraced her expensive perfume surrounding Margaret like a beautifully decorated cage. "You're amazing, Mom. That's why we love you so much." Now sitting in the bank with Derek's painful grip on her arm, Margaret recognized the terrible truth. This wasn't a simple procedure. This was a plot to take her final $30,000, all that stood between her and homelessness. She stared at the documents, the black ink seeming to mark the end of her independent life. While Elaine spoke with the bank clerk, Margaret reached for a deposit slip and hastily wrote, "Help me. I'm being forced to sign over my last $30,000. Her hand trembled, but the writing remained clear, the only sign of the independent spirit that had been buried too long beneath the role of the mother who always gives. As she approached the counter, Margaret's heart raced when she recognized the familiar face behind the desk. Sam Wilson, a 25-year-old with a warm smile whom she had watched grow up at First Baptist Church. The son of her best friend from the Women's Auxiliary graduated college last year. "Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted, then noticed the tension in her face. His eyes dropped to the paper she pushed toward him with her ID, read the message, and not a flicker on his face revealed that he understood the situation. Professionally, he quietly passed the slip to the branch manager, Michael Thompson, who immediately assessed the situation and took action. Thompson, a distinguished man with silver hair and experienced eyes, walked to the counter with keys in hand. He locked the glass doors of the bank, then pressed the elder abuse alert button beneath the counter. A soft chime pulsed beneath the air conditioning's hum, but Margaret heard it, the sound of hope. 2 security guards gradually moved toward their table, deliberately appearing to be checking the area while police were called. The wall clock read 3:25 p.m. Only 10 minutes had passed, but Margaret's entire life had changed. Thompson approached their table with a professional smile. "I apologize for the interruption. I need to review some details of this transaction before we proceed." Derek, still gripping Margaret's arm, looked up with a flicker of nervousness. "What kind of details? Everything's in order. Mrs. Reynolds wants to transfer money to her daughter's account. It's a family decision." Thompson nodded politely. "I understand, but bank protocol requires me to verify that all parties are acting voluntarily and without external pressure." He looked directly into Margaret's eyes. "Mrs. Reynolds, would you mind accompanying me to my office for a private verification? It's standard procedure for transactions of this magnitude." Elaine immediately tensed. "That's not necessary, sir. My mother has already decided, haven't you, Mom?" Her smile had become forced artificial, like a mask that was cracking. "We can do everything right here. We don't want to cause you any trouble." But Thompson was already standing, extending his hand toward Margaret. "It's bank policy, ma'am, no exceptions." The security guards had positioned themselves discreetly near their table. "It will only take a few minutes." Margaret stood, her legs trembling, and for the first time all afternoon, Derek had to release her arm. Elaine grabbed her other hand. "Mom, don't make this difficult. Just sign the papers and let's go home. Sophie is waiting for us." "I'll be right back," Margaret murmured, not daring to meet her eyes. She knew if she saw that innocent little girl expression Elaine had perfected over the years, she might waver, might give in one more time. Thompson's office was small but cozy, with family photos on his desk and a small cactus by the window. He closed the door and sat across from Margaret. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said gently, "tell me what's really going on." And then, like a dam finally breaking it all, poured out. Margaret told him about the years of financial manipulation, about the $100,000 she had given without getting anything back, about Derek hurting her arm, about Elaine using Sophie's name for emotional blackmail, about her fear of homelessness at 69. Thompson listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, taking notes in a notebook. When Margaret finished her story, he sighed deeply. "Ma'am, what you're describing is financial coercion and in some cases elder abuse. What your daughter and son-in-law are doing is illegal." The word illegal echoed in Margaret's head. All these years she had thought it was her duty, her responsibility as a mother, to give until it hurt. It had never occurred to her that what Elaine was doing could have a legal name, that it could be a crime. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "She's my daughter. I don't want to get her in trouble, but I can't go on like this. I don't have anything left to give." Thompson leaned forward. "First, we're going to cancel this transaction. Second, I'm going to document everything you've told me. Third, I'm going to give you information on legal and protective resources for seniors." He paused. "But ma'am, the most important decision is yours to make. Are you ready to say no? Are you ready to set boundaries, even if it means your daughter gets angry?" That question hit Margaret like a punch to the gut. Was she ready? For 69 years, her identity had been built around being the woman who always said yes, the woman who always gave, the woman who sacrificed for others. If she stopped being that person, who would she be? She thought of George, of how he had worked until the day he died to support their family. She thought of the times she had eaten beans for weeks so she could pay for Elaine's private school. She thought of all the nights she had stayed awake, calculating expenses, clipping coupons, looking for ways to stretch every dollar. And then she thought of Sophie, her 8-year-old granddaughter, growing up watching her mother manipulate her grandmother. What lessons was she learning? That love could be bought with money. That it was okay to hurt those who love you if you get what you want. That older people were resources to be exploited until they were exhausted. "Yes," she said finally, and her voice sounded stronger than she had expected. "I'm ready." Thompson nodded and began to write. "All right, we're going to start by putting an alert on all your accounts. No one will be able to make transactions without your physical presence and additional identity verification. I'm also going to give you the number for a hotline to report elder abuse." As he worked, Margaret looked out his office window. She could see Elaine and Derek in the waiting area. Elaine was pacing back and forth, talking on the phone with agitated gestures. Derek remained seated, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was drumming his fingers on the table. They knew something had gone wrong. They knew their plan was falling apart. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel guilty about disappointing them. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: control. Power. The ability to make her own decisions without someone else telling her what to do or how to feel about it. Thompson finished writing and handed Margaret several papers. This is a copy of our incident report. This is the number for the helpline. And this, he handed her a small card, is my direct extension. If they pressure or threaten you again, call me immediately. Margaret took the papers with hands that no longer trembled. What do I do now? How do I explain to them that I'm not going to sign? Tell them the truth, Thompson replied. That you've decided to keep your money for your own living expenses. You don't have to justify anything else. It's your money, ma'am. You worked for it. You saved it. And you have every right to keep it for yourself. Margaret took a deep breath. It was time to face her daughter. Time to become a person who could say no. Time to start living for herself, even if it meant breaking a lifelong pattern. They walked out of the office together. Elaine immediately approached her face a mix of anxiety and contained anger. What took so long, Mom? We're going to be late. Margaret looked at her daughter, this 35-year-old woman who had built her entire life on her mother's inability to deny her anything. And for the first time in decades, she said the words that would change everything, her voice clear and steady as crystal bells. Elaine, I'm not going to sign. I'm not transferring my money. The silence that followed was deafening. Elaine looked at her as if she had just been slapped, her green eyes flashing with a mixture of shock and fury Margaret had never seen before. Derek stood up from his chair so abruptly he nearly knocked it over his fists clenched at his sides. What do you mean you're not going to sign? Elaine asked in a trembling voice, trying to maintain a fake smile for the bank cameras. Mom, we already talked about this. It's just a temporary transfer. It's not temporary, Elaine, Margaret replied in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. It was firm, decisive, like that of a woman who had finally found her backbone after years of letting others bend it to their will. And it's not a transfer. It's my retirement money and I'm keeping it. Derek stepped closer, but the security guards immediately moved as well, positioning themselves between them. Margaret, he said in that soft voice he used when he wanted to manipulate her. Don't be ridiculous. What are you going to do with all that money? You don't have any big expenses. We can invest it better. Make it grow for the whole family. For the whole family, Margaret repeated, and a bitter laugh escaped her throat. Like when you invested the $40,000 for your house down payment, or when you invested the $20,000 I gave you when you lost your job. Tell me, Derek, how much of that have you paid back? She saw his mask of fake concern crack. His eyes hardened, revealing the calculating coldness that had always been there, but that she had been too blind to see. Those were gifts, he muttered through gritted teeth. You said they were gifts. I never said that, she retorted, and the words came out of her like boiling water, finally finding a crack in the pot. You promised you'd pay me back. You promised it was temporary. You promised a lot of things you never fulfilled. Elaine began to cry. But these weren't the genuine tears of pain Margaret had seen when she was a child and scraped her knee. These were calculated tears, performance tears, tears designed to break Margaret's resolve. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything we've shared, after all the love we've given each other. Love. The word shot out of Margaret's mouth like a bullet. You call threatening me love. You call it love when your husband hurts my arm. You call it love when you trick me into coming here to steal everything I have. People in the bank started to turn their heads. An older woman waiting in line watched them with concern. A young man in a suit had stopped checking his phone and was staring openly. Elaine realized the attention they were attracting and lowered her voice, but the intensity of her desperation only increased. Okay, she whispered, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. Don't transfer everything, just half. $15,000 is all we need to get out of this jam. What jam, Elaine? Margaret asked, and she could see the question took her daughter by surprise. Derek has a job. You have a house. What exactly is the emergency that requires my retirement money? Elaine was silent for a moment, and in that silence Margaret saw the truth she had been avoiding for years. There was no emergency, no real crisis. Just two adults who had built their lifestyle around her inability to say no. They had spent more than they earned because they knew Mom would always be there to make up the difference. Elaine, Margaret continued, You're 35 years old. Your husband is 38. You both have college degrees that I paid for. You both have jobs. It's time for you to learn to live on your own income." "What about Sophie?" Derek asked, playing his strongest card. "What about your granddaughter? Are you going to let her suffer because her grandmother became selfish?" That word selfish hit Margaret like a slap. All her life she had feared being selfish. She had sacrificed her wants, her needs, her dreams, all so she wouldn't be selfish. But now, standing in that bank with her last 30,000 about to be stolen, she realized something fundamental. It wasn't selfish to take care of herself. It was survival. "Sophie is not going to suffer," she said firmly. "You can continue to provide for her with your own income just like millions of responsible parents do all over the world. What you can't do is use my love for my granddaughter to manipulate me." Thompson cleared his throat. "Sir, ma'am, you need to leave. Mrs. Reynolds has made it very clear that she does not wish to proceed with this transaction, and continuing to pressure her constitutes harassment." "She's my mother," Elaine snapped. "I have a right to talk to my mother." "Not when you're intimidating her on bank property," Thompson replied with authority. "The guards will escort you out." Elaine looked at Margaret with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't disappointment. It was pure crystallized hatred forged after years of hidden resentment. "Fine, Mom," she said in a voice as cold as ice. "If that's what you want. But don't come crying when you're all alone in that empty house with no one to visit you, with no one to care about you. And don't call when you need help," Derek added. "Don't call when you're sick or when you can't manage the stairs. We're not your personal health insurance." Their words were designed to scare her, to make her imagine a lonely, unprotected future, and they worked partially. Margaret felt a chill of fear run down her spine. What if she really did get sick? What if she did need help? What if this decision to keep her money cost her her family? But then she remembered something George had told her shortly before he passed away. They were sitting in the living room watching a television show about scams targeting seniors, and he had commented, "Margaret, fear is the most powerful tool manipulators have. They make you imagine all the horrors that could happen if you don't do what they want. But the truth is, most of those things never happen. And if they do, you face them when they come, not before." "I understand," she said to Elaine, and her voice sounded calmer than she felt inside. "If that's your decision, I accept it. But I'm not going to change mine out of fear of what might happen in the future." The security guards moved closer. "Folks, it's time to go," one of them said with professional firmness. Elaine snatched up her purse with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over, Mom. We'll talk about this at home when you don't have these strangers filling your head with ridiculous ideas." "No," Margaret said, and the word came out stronger than she had expected. "We are not going to talk about this at home. Not until you're ready to accept my decision without trying to change it." They left without looking back. Derek, with a possessive hand on Elaine's back, whispering something in her ear that made her shoulders tense even more. Margaret watched them walk toward the parking lot through the bank windows. Two figures walking away from her life, taking with them years of manipulation and emotional blackmail. When she could no longer see them, Margaret sat down heavily in one of the chairs in the waiting area. Her legs were trembling not from fear, but from the release of years of pent-up tension. She had done something she never thought she would be capable of. She had said no to her daughter. She had chosen her well-being over her daughter's manipulation. Thompson came over and sat beside her. "How do you feel?" he asked. Margaret thought about it for a moment before answering. "Scared," she admitted, "but also free. As if I could finally breathe after years of holding my breath." The wall clock read 3:45 p.m. 30 minutes that had changed everything. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Margaret watched a bird land on a nearby tree, then take flight again, its wings catching the golden light. For the first time in decades, she felt the stirring of possibility, of hope, of a life that belonged to her. "What happens now?" she asked Thompson, not entirely sure if she was asking about the bank procedures or her life in general. "Now," he said with gentle certainty, "you begin again." The days that followed the confrontation at the bank unfolded in waves of silence and turmoil. Margaret returned to a house that felt both familiar and strange, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift in her universe. She moved through the rooms like a visitor, touching photo frames and trinkets collected over decades, seeing them with new eyes. The answering machine blinked accusingly, 17 messages, each one from Elaine, the desperate pleas gradually transforming into threats as the hours passed. Margaret pushed the play button standing in the stillness of her kitchen where she'd prepared thousands of meals for a family that had consumed more than food. "Mom, pick up, please. I know you're there. We need to talk about what happened." The first message, Elaine's voice trembling. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Stop punishing us and answer the phone." Message 4, irritation seeping through. "Fine, don't answer. But know that Sophie is crying every night asking for her grandmother. Is that what you want?" Message 9, the emotional manipulation beginning. "If you don't call back by tomorrow, we're coming over. You can't hide forever." Message 14, the threats emerging. "The bank manager filled your head with nonsense. Elder abuse. That's absurd. We're your family. We're the only ones who care about you." The final message, Elaine's voice cracking with rage and desperation. Margaret deleted them all with a single button press, the small electronic beep marking the first boundary of many to come. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence that followed the same clock that had witnessed countless family dinners and late-night conversations with George. Its steady rhythm reminded her that time would continue, regardless of her choices, that the future stretched before her, whether she embraced it or not. She made tea using the porcelain pot George had given her for their 30th anniversary, the familiar ritual providing comfort as darkness fell outside. The house creaked and settled around her, no longer feeling empty, but rather like a sanctuary, her sanctuary where she could begin to rediscover the woman who had been buried under decades of obligation. Sleep came fitfully that night, dreams of George intermingling with images of Elaine as a child holding up crayon drawings with the pride only innocence can produce. Where had that little girl gone? When had the sweet child transformed into a calculating woman who saw her mother as nothing more than a financial resource? The questions haunted Margaret until dawn painted her bedroom walls with golden light. On the third day after the bank incident, Margaret was watering the geraniums on her front porch when a black SUV pulled into her driveway. Elaine emerged from the driver's side, Derek from the passengers, and between them, clutching a pink backpack and looking uncertain, was Sophie. The sight of her granddaughter sent a surge of love and apprehension through Margaret's chest. They approached like an invading army, using a beloved hostage as a shield. Sophie broke formation, running toward Margaret with the uninhibited joy of childhood arms outstretched. "Grandma, I missed you so much." Her small body collided with Margaret's legs, a collision of genuine affection amid the battlefield of adult manipulation. Margaret embraced her granddaughter, inhaling the scent of strawberry shampoo and innocence while maintaining eye contact with Elaine. A silent message passed between them. Margaret would not be moved, would not be manipulated even with Sophie as leverage. "Look what I drew for you." Sophie pulled a folded paper from her backpack, a crayon masterpiece of 2 figures holding hands, one small with yellow hair, one tall with silver, standing before a house with a disproportionately large heart floating above it. "It's us, and this is your house, and the heart shows how much we love each other." The transparency of the ploy was painful. Sophie's art was genuine, but her presence was strategic, a calculated move by parents who knew exactly which emotional strings to pull. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Would you like some lemonade? I made it fresh this morning." Margaret led Sophie inside, leaving Elaine and Derek to follow their strategy, already faltering as Margaret controlled the situation rather than reacting to it. In the kitchen, Margaret poured lemonade while Sophie chatted about school and ballet class. Elaine and Derek remained standing, tension evident in their rigid postures. The family portrait on the refrigerator taken on Sophie's 7th birthday seemed to mock the current reality, the smiling faces a sharp contrast to the cold calculation now filling the room. "Sophie, why don't you go look at the new bird feeder Grandma put in the backyard? There are beautiful cardinals that come in the afternoon." Derek's suggestion wasn't subtle, the adult conversation clearly about to begin. Once Sophie skipped away, the pretense of a normal family visit evaporated. Elaine leaned against the counter, arms crossed defensively. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened at the bank. You embarrassed us in front of everyone, made us look like criminals. You behaved like criminals." The words emerged from Margaret with surprising ease, the newfound strength from the bank confrontation solidifying within her. Forcing an elderly woman to sign away her savings is criminal behavior, regardless of family connections. Derek's face flushed red beneath his carefully maintained tan. "That's outrageous. We were helping you manage your finances. At your age, complex financial decisions become difficult. We're looking out for your best interests. My best interests or your vacation to Mexico? Margaret watched satisfaction as both their expressions faltered. Yes, I know about that. Just like I know about the cruise you took with my last loan that was supposedly for mortgage payments. A hummingbird appeared at the kitchen window, hovering momentarily before darting away, free, nimble, impossible to capture. Margaret felt a kinship with the tiny creature that she had never noticed before. Mom, you're being dramatic. Everyone needs vacations to decompress, especially with the financial stress we're under. Elaine's voice adopted the patient tone one might use with a confused child. We've done everything for you since Dad died. Checked on you, included you in holidays, made sure Sophie spent time with you. Most elderly parents would be grateful. Grateful for what? For taking over $100,000 from me in the last 5 years, for leaving me with barely enough to survive, for treating me like a bank rather than a mother. Margaret's voice remained level, her newfound confidence neither hostile nor apologetic, merely factual. The only thing I should be grateful for is Mr. Thompson stopping you before you took my last $30,000. Derek stepped forward, his imposing height used intentionally to intimidate. You know what, Margaret? You've become paranoid and ungrateful in your old age. Maybe we should look into assisted living facilities if you can't make rational decisions anymore. The threat hung in the air between them, but rather than fear, Margaret felt a strange calm settle over her. They had shown their true intentions. If they couldn't control her money through manipulation, they would try to have her declared incompetent. The revelation was painful, but clarifying, like lancing a long, festering wound. I had a complete cognitive assessment last month at my doctor's recommendation after George's death. A strategic lie, but one that emerged effortlessly. I scored in the 90th percentile for my age group. Feel free to request those records through proper legal channels with a court order. The fabrication achieved its purpose. Both Elaine and Derek faltered, their strategy crumbling before it could fully form. Margaret continued pressing her advantage. Additionally, I've scheduled appointments with both a financial advisor and an elder law attorney for next week. Any future requests for money will need to go through them. Sophie's laughter drifted in from the backyard, a painful reminder of innocence among the toxic adult manipulations. Elaine's expression hardened, her final weapon about to be deployed. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, we'll respect your decision. But relationships go both ways, Mom. If you don't want to help us financially anymore, we'll have to limit our visits. Our schedules are so busy and gas is expensive. Sophie's calendar is packed with activities. The implication was clear: access to Sophie would be restricted unless the financial tap remained open. It was their nuclear option, and they deployed it with calculated precision. Margaret absorbed the blow, feeling it land deep in her heart. The thought of losing Sophie was almost unbearable. Yet something within her had fundamentally changed at the bank 3 days ago, some essential core of self-preservation that could no longer be bargained away. I understand. Margaret's response emerged with surprising steadiness. I love Sophie with all my heart, but I won't be financially blackmailed even with my granddaughter as leverage. If you choose to keep her from me, that's your decision. But remember, children grow up. One day she'll be old enough to make her own choices about who to see and what to believe. The unexpected response left both Elaine and Derek momentarily speechless. They had wielded their strongest weapon only to find it deflected with calm foresight. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted irrevocably. For the first time, Margaret wasn't the supplicant in the relationship, she was an equal participant setting her own terms. We should go. Elaine's voice had lost its manipulative sweetness, replaced by cold finality. Sophie, come inside, we're leaving. Margaret watched as her granddaughter returned, confusion evident on her small face at the abrupt departure. But we just got here. Can't we stay longer with Grandma? Not today, sweetie. Grandma isn't feeling well. Elaine's pointed glare dared Margaret to contradict the lie. Margaret knelt to Sophie's level, looking into eyes still untainted by adult calculations. I'm sorry we don't have more time today, but I want you to remember something. My door is always open to you, and my love doesn't come with price tags or conditions. It's yours always, no matter what. The words were for Sophie, but their message extended beyond the child. Both adults stiffened, recognizing the implicit criticism in Margaret's carefully chosen words. Sophie hugged her grandmother fiercely, instinctively understanding something important was happening, even if the adult complexities remained beyond her grasp. As the SUV backed out of the driveway, Sophie's small hand waving from the rear window, Margaret experienced a complex mixture of anguish and liberation. The cost of her newfound boundaries had been painfully high, but the alternative continuing as an ATM for Elaine and Derek's lifestyle had become impossible. That evening, Margaret sat on her back porch, watching twilight settle over her garden, remembering how George had tended each plant with meticulous care. The realization that she might not see Sophie for weeks, possibly months, settled heavily on her shoulders. Yet beneath the sorrow lay a surprisingly sturdy foundation of certainty. She had done the right thing, the necessary thing even as it broke her heart. The next morning brought unexpected clarity along with the sunrise. Margaret made her bed with hospital corners as she had done every day since nursing school, the familiar routine grounding her in the midst of emotional turmoil. She dressed carefully, applying light makeup and selecting a blue blouse George had always complimented. Today would not be spent in self-pity or regret. Today would be the first day of whatever remained of her life. The phone rang as she finished breakfast, a number she didn't recognize displayed on the caller ID. Hesitantly, Margaret answered, prepared to hang up if it was Elaine using a different phone. "Margaret, it's David Evans. I hope I'm not calling too early." The familiar voice of George's old friend came as a surprise. They had spoken only occasionally since the warning about Derek's embezzlement 6 months earlier. Their conversation unfolded naturally, David inquiring about her well-being, Margaret surprising herself by revealing the entire bank incident. Rather than pity, David's response carried understanding and admiration. "You showed tremendous courage, Margaret. I know exactly how difficult it is to set boundaries with family who see you as nothing more than a financial resource." For the first time, David shared his own story, how his ex-wife and son had systematically drained his retirement accounts using emotional manipulation to extract over $200,000 before he finally recognized the pattern and stopped it. The parallels to Margaret's situation were striking a painful reminder that financial elder abuse crossed all demographic boundaries. "Would you be interested in joining me for lunch? There's a support group meeting afterward that I think might help. People who've been through similar situations. No pressure, just thought you might find it valuable." David's invitation came without ulterior motives or hidden agendas, a refreshing change after years of interactions laced with calculations. The small Italian restaurant near downtown Chicago hummed with lunchtime conversation as Margaret and David settled into a corner booth. David, with his neatly trimmed silver hair and kind eyes, projected a calmness that Margaret found reassuring. Their conversation flowed easily, covering books they'd read, places they'd traveled, and shared memories of George, ordinary topics that adults discuss when money isn't the hidden agenda. "You know, George worried about Elaine's financial dependence on you both." David buttered a piece of bread thoughtfully. He mentioned it several times in those last years, concerned about what would happen after he was gone. The revelation struck Margaret with unexpected force. George had seen the pattern forming, but had kept his concerns largely to himself, not wanting to burden her during his illness. Another way he had tried to protect her, even as his body failed him. "I should have listened to you 6 months ago when you warned me about Derek." Margaret's admission emerged without self-recrimination, simply acknowledging a truth. "But sometimes we need to discover certain realities in our own time, I suppose." After lunch, David drove them to a community center housed in a renovated Victorian building near Lincoln Park. The support group met in a sunlit room with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. 12 people of varying ages, though most over 50, greeted them with nods of recognition that required no explanations. The facilitator, a woman named Sandra with cropped gray hair and a forthright manner, welcomed Margaret without making her feel like a specimen under examination. "We're glad you're here. Everyone shares only if and when they feel comfortable." As the meeting progressed, Margaret listened to stories that echoed her own with uncanny similarity. A 70-year-old retired teacher whose son had systematically emptied her accounts through forged checks. A 65-year-old widower who had mortgaged his house 3 times to cover his brother's gambling debts. A woman Margaret's age whose daughter had convinced her to put the family home in the daughter's name, for tax purposes, only to sell it without warning, leaving her mother effectively homeless. When it came time for Margaret to speak, the words flowed more easily than expected, the commonality of experience creating a safe harbor for truths that might otherwise remain hidden. She described the years of financial manipulation, the bank confrontation, the recent visit where Sophie was used as emotional leverage. No one interrupted. No one judged. Each person in the room recognized the particular agony of being exploited by those you love most. Financial abuse by family members is one of the hardest types to recognize, Sandra explained after Margaret finished. It's wrapped in love family obligation guilt. The abusers know exactly what to say to make us feel like we're the ones being unreasonable when we protect ourselves. A woman named Eleanor in her 70s with artfully henned hair and a quiet dignity offered advice that resonated deeply. Margaret, you will doubt your decision 1,000 times. You'll ask yourself if you were too harsh, if you overreacted, if you should just call your daughter and apologize. Those moments of doubt are normal. But every time you feel that doubt, remember how you felt in that bank, the fear, the physical pain, the desperation. Those feelings don't lie. The wisdom in Eleanor's words settled into Margaret's consciousness like a foundation stone. The memory of Derek's painful grip on her arm of the terror, as she realized they planned to take everything, these weren't imagined slights or misunderstandings. They were real violations that her body and spirit had registered with perfect clarity. After the meeting, Eleanor approached Margaret with surprising news. I teach watercolor painting at the senior center on Thursdays. You should join us. It's therapeutic and the social connection doesn't hurt either. The casual invitation with no strings attached struck Margaret as revolutionary in its simplicity. That night, 3 new voicemails waited on Margaret's answering machine. She listened with growing clarity to the manipulative patterns that once would have swayed her. Elaine's voice moving through a predictable cycle, guilt, concern, anger, back to guilt. Mom, Sophie keeps asking about you. She's depressed and doesn't understand why her grandmother doesn't want to see her. The first attempt using Sophie as emotional currency. Mom, Derek and I have been talking and we think you should see a doctor. This behavior isn't normal for you. The second strategy invalidating Margaret's decision-making capacity. Mom, I'm starting to wonder if you're having memory problems. Have you considered you might be developing dementia? The third approach, the most insidious, suggesting cognitive decline to undermine Margaret's confidence in her own perceptions. Each message represented a different manipulation strategy, executed with surgical precision. Margaret deleted them without returning the calls, recognizing that any response would only provide new material for exploitation. The next morning brought an unexpected ring at the doorbell. Through the peephole, Margaret saw Sophie in her school uniform alone on the front step with her pink backpack. Confusion and alarm battled within her. Why was an 8-year-old child alone at her door during school hours? Sophie, what are you doing here? Does your mother know where you are? Margaret ushered her granddaughter inside, noticing the bus stop across the street where Sophie must have disembarked. I took the bus by myself. I remembered the route from our visits. Sophie's voice carried pride in her independence. I used my allowance for the fare. Mommy borrowed her work friend's phone to call you yesterday. She said you don't answer when we call from home anymore. Margaret's heart raced with the realization that Elaine had sent her young daughter alone on public transportation as a manipulation tactic, a new low that bordered on child endangerment. Sweetheart, while I'm always happy to see you, your mom and dad need to know where you are. They must be worried. Not yet. They think I'm at school, but my teacher, Mrs. Wilson, will notice I'm missing at lunchtime. Sophie's matter-of-fact explanation revealed both resourcefulness and a disturbing awareness of how to navigate adult systems. Margaret made a decision, reaching for the phone. I need to call your parents right away, Sophie. You can't disappear without telling adults where you are. It's not safe. Please don't call yet. Sophie's sudden distress was palpable. I came to ask you something important, and if you call now, they'll come get me before I can ask. The desperation in her granddaughter's voice gave Margaret pause. What's so important, sweetheart? My birthday is in 2 months, and I wanted to ask if you can help me buy a new dress for my ballet recital. Mommy says it costs $200 and they don't have the money this month. There it was, the real purpose of the visit. Elaine had orchestrated this entire scenario using her 8-year-old daughter as a proxy to solicit money, putting the child at risk on public transportation to execute the plan. The realization struck Margaret like a physical blow. Sophie, let me talk to your mom. Margaret dialed Elaine's cell number, her hand steady despite the anger building within her. When Elaine answered, her voice shifted instantly from annoyance to calculated warmth upon hearing Margaret's voice. Mom? What a nice surprise. I was just thinking about you. Sophie is at my house. She took the bus alone, which I'm sure you already know since you sent her here to ask for ballet recital money. Margaret's directness left no room for manipulation or denial. Silence stretched across the connection before Elaine responded, her voice no longer maintaining the pretense of warmth. "I'm coming to pick her up. Don't say anything to confuse her." "I'll explain exactly what happened, Elaine. How you endangered your daughter by sending her on public transportation alone to ask for money. Would you like me to call Child Protective Services to discuss it with them instead?" The threat emerged from some new core of strength Margaret hadn't known she possessed. 30 minutes later, Elaine's SUV screeched into the driveway. She stormed to the door, composed herself visibly before knocking, then plastered on a smile as Margaret opened it. "Sophie, get your things. We need to go. You're in serious trouble, young lady." Margaret placed a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Your mother and I need to talk privately for a few minutes. Why don't you finish the cookies in the kitchen while we chat on the porch?" Once alone on the porch, the facade dropped instantly from Elaine's face. "How dare you threaten me with CPS? I'm an excellent mother." Excellent mothers don't send their children alone on public transit to solicit money from relatives. That's not parenting, Elaine. It's exploitation of a child. Margaret's voice remained level, her newfound clarity unwavering in the face of Elaine's anger. "You don't understand anything. We're struggling financially while you sit on money you don't even need." Elaine's voice rose, neighborhood curtains twitching in response to the commotion. "Then explain it to me. Explain why a couple with 2 professional incomes can't afford a $200 ballet costume without sending their child to beg from her grandmother." Margaret crossed her arms, unmoved by the dramatics that once would have immediately opened her checkbook. Elaine's response came with unexpected vulnerability, her voice dropping as anger gave way to something that appeared genuinely fragile. "Fine. You want the truth? We're drowning in debt. Credit cards, loans, the second mortgage. Derek's gambling got out of control last year. He was trying to earn back the money he took from his company. We owe over $50,000 to creditors who are threatening to take the house. Sophie's ballet costume is the least of our problems, but it matters to her, and I wanted to give her something normal." The confession hung between them. Elaine's first moment of apparent honesty in years. Margaret studied her daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation, finding instead the unfamiliar landscape of genuine desperation. "I want to believe you, Elaine, but you've lied to me so many times, used my love for you and Sophie to extract money that never goes where you claim it will." Margaret's response was neither judgmental nor accepting, simply acknowledging the reality of their fractured trust. "It's true this time. I swear it." Elaine's voice cracked with what seemed like authentic emotion. "I don't know what to do anymore. Derek refuses to get help for the gambling. He says he can win it all back with one good streak." Margaret felt the familiar pull to rescue, to solve, to give until it hurt. The pattern was so deeply ingrained that her hand almost reached for her purse automatically, but the recent lessons had taken root too deeply to be easily dislodged. "I can't give you money, Elaine. Not anymore." Margaret held firm despite the pain it caused to see her daughter in distress. "But I can offer alternatives. Have you considered talking to the ballet school? They often have assistance programs or costume exchanges. Have you looked into credit counseling services, Gamblers Anonymous for Derek?" "It's not that easy, Mom." Elaine's voice carried genuine frustration. "I know it's not easy, but it's possible. Millions of families solve these kinds of problems every day without asking their aging parents for money." Margaret held her daughter's gaze. "What kind of example are you setting for Sophie when your solution to every problem is to ask someone else for money rather than addressing the root issues?" The question landed with visible impact. For perhaps the first time, Elaine seemed to consider her mother's words, rather than immediately formulating a counter-strategy. In the momentary silence, a blue jay landed on the porch railing, observed them curiously, then flew away unbound by human complications. "I need to think about all this." Elaine's response lacked her usual defensive hostility. "We should go. Sophie has already missed half a school day." As they prepared to leave, Margaret knelt to Sophie's level, mindful that her granddaughter had absorbed far more of the adult dynamics than anyone acknowledged. "Remember what I told you last time. My love doesn't come with price tags or conditions. Visit me any time, but please have an adult bring you. The bus isn't safe for someone your age to ride alone." Sophie nodded solemnly, her eyes reflecting an understanding beyond her years. "I'm sorry I asked for money, Grandma." "Don't be sorry, sweetheart. The adults in your life put you in that position, and that wasn't fair to you." Margaret hugged her tightly, inhaling the childhood scent that never failed to evoke fierce protectiveness. After they left, Margaret sat in her garden processing the encounter. The revelation about Derek's gambling explained much about their desperate financial situation, though it didn't excuse the years of manipulation. If Elaine was finally being honest, perhaps there was hope for a healthier relationship in the future. But Margaret had learned the hard way not to base her decisions on hope alone. That evening, the unexpected ring of the telephone interrupted Margaret's quiet dinner. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, so she answered cautiously, half expecting another manipulation attempt from Elaine using a different phone. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Michael Thompson from First Heritage Bank. I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." The familiar voice of the bank manager who had intervened during the confrontation brought both surprise and a tinge of anxiety. "Not at all, Mr. Thompson. Is everything all right with my accounts?" Margaret set down her fork, bracing for potential bad news. "Your accounts are secure, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm actually calling because something concerning happened today. Your daughter and son-in-law came to the bank attempting to access a joint account they apparently had with you from several years ago. An account that fortunately we had placed alerts on after our previous incident." Margaret struggled to process this information, no memory of such an account surfacing. "I don't understand. What joint account?" "It seems that 3 years ago, when you were caring for your sick husband, you added your daughter's name to a secondary savings account in case of emergency. Do you recall that?" Thompson's gentle question illuminated a forgotten moment during the confusing days after George's diagnosis, when Elaine had insisted on helping organize Margaret's financial affairs. "I vaguely remember signing some papers Elaine brought home. She said it was just a precaution in case something happened to me while caring for George." The memory returned hazily from a time when Margaret had trusted her daughter completely. "The account contains approximately $12,000. They attempted to withdraw the entire amount today, but our system automatically flagged it and called me. When I explained they couldn't make transactions without your presence and explicit authorization, they became quite aggressive. Security had to intervene." $12,000. Money Margaret had forgotten existed. Money Elaine had been waiting for the perfect moment to take. The bank confrontation hadn't been their first attempt to appropriate her funds, just their most desperate one. "What happens to the account now?" Margaret asked, her voice steadier than she expected, given this fresh betrayal. "We've transferred the funds completely to your name and removed all other signatories. The money is safe, Mrs. Reynolds." After thanking Thompson and ending the call, Margaret sat motionless at her kitchen table, processing this final confirmation of Elaine and Derek's true intentions. Despite Elaine's seemingly vulnerable confession hours earlier about Derek's gambling and their financial troubles, they had gone directly to the bank afterward to attempt another theft. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, Margaret felt a strange clarity, as if the last illusion had finally been stripped away. The daughter she had raised, the child she had sacrificed everything for, had become someone Margaret no longer recognized, or perhaps had refused to recognize for far too long. 3 days later, Margaret attended her first watercolor class at the senior center, accepting Eleanor's invitation with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. She hadn't created art since high school, convinced somewhere along the way that practical matters deserved all her attention. The classroom smelled of paint and possibility 12 easels arranged before windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. "Don't worry about talent or technique today," Eleanor instructed the class with gentle authority. "Just observe how the water and pigment interact. Notice how they sometimes work together and sometimes resist each other, creating unexpected patterns." Margaret dipped her brush into clear water, then touched it to a pan of cobalt blue. The color bloomed across the dampened paper like a tiny universe, expanding boundaries, fluid and unpredictable. Something about the process, the lack of rigid control, the beauty and unexpected outcomes resonated deeply within her. "I've never been good at art," Margaret confessed to Eleanor during a break, examining her first attempt with critical eyes. "That's because you're still thinking about good in terms of exact reproduction." Eleanor's advice came with the wisdom of someone who had traveled this path before. "Watercolor isn't about control, Margaret. It's about collaboration between artist and medium. You suggest rather than demand. You work with what emerges rather than forcing your vision." The metaphor wasn't lost on Margaret. For decades, she had tried to control outcomes through sacrifice and giving, believing she could ensure love and security by surrendering her own needs. Yet the results had proven as unpredictable as watercolor on wet paper, with patterns emerging that no amount of self-denial could have prevented. At the next support group meeting, Margaret shared the story of the joint account attempted theft, her voice steady as she recounted the final confirmation of Elaine and Derek's intentions. The group received her news without surprise, many having experienced similar escalations when their initial boundaries proved effective. "They'll keep trying different approaches," a retired accountant named Richard warned the group. "When manipulation fails, they often escalate to legal threats claiming you're incompetent, need guardianship, can't manage your affairs. Document everything. Keep records of all interactions. Consider having a trusted friend present for any future meetings." Sandra, the facilitator, distributed information on legal resources for seniors, including free consultations with attorneys specializing in elder law. Knowledge is power. Understanding your legal rights is essential when family members attempt to circumvent your financial autonomy. As weeks passed without contact from Elaine, Margaret established new routines that gradually filled the painful void. Thursday watercolor classes with Eleanor, Tuesday support group meetings, volunteer work at the hospital where she had once worked, reading to patients who had no visitors. Each activity added purpose and connection to days that might otherwise have been consumed by dwelling on loss. The call from her younger sister Linda came unexpectedly one evening as Margaret prepared for bed. They spoke infrequently, geographical distance and different lifestyles having created emotional distance over the years. "Margaret, Elaine called me. She says you've cut her off completely, that you won't answer her calls or give her access to money that should rightfully be hers." Linda's accusatory tone suggested she had accepted Elaine's version of events without question. "That's not quite accurate, Linda." Margaret kept her voice neutral, determined not to be drawn into defensive justifications. "I've chosen not to continue financially supporting adults who are capable of supporting themselves. That's different from cutting off my daughter. But family helps each other, Margaret. That's what we were raised to believe." Linda's perspective reflected their shared upbringing where family obligations superseded individual needs. "There's a difference between helping and enabling destructive behavior. There's a difference between generosity and being treated like a personal ATM." Margaret's response carried no bitterness, only the calm certainty of someone who had finally recognized essential truths about herself and her relationships. After hanging up with her sister, Margaret realized that even people who loved her wouldn't fully understand what she had experienced. They had seen the financial transfers, but not the emotional manipulation. They had seen the generous gifts, but not the veiled threats when she hesitated. It was impossible to explain years of subtle abuse to someone who had only observed the surface. The afternoon Sophie appeared alone at her door marked a significant turning point. The child stood on Margaret's porch in her school uniform without Elaine or Derek for the first time since the confrontation. "Grandma, can I talk to you?" Margaret's heart leapt with both joy and concern. "Sophie, does your mother know you're here?" "Mrs. Wilson from next door drove me. She saw me at the bus stop and recognized me from when we used to visit you." Sophie's explanation provided immediate relief. She hadn't been sent alone on public transportation again. "I told Mom I was going to my friend Maria's house after school. I hope that's okay." The small deception revealed Sophie's determination to reconnect regardless of her parents' attempts to sever the relationship. Margaret ushered her inside, noticing how much taller the child seemed after just a few weeks apart, as if the separation had accelerated her growth. "I brought you something." Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a carefully folded piece of construction paper. Inside was a pressed flower, a violet from Margaret's own garden, preserved between sheets of waxed paper. "I saved it from the last time we were here. I thought you might miss your flowers." The simple gesture carried profound meaning, Sophie remembering Margaret's love for her garden, thinking about her grandmother's feelings, preserving a connection through something as delicate and resilient as a flower. Margaret felt tears threatening and blinked them back, determined to make this unexpected time together positive and uncomplicated. They spent an hour in comfortable companionship, Sophie describing school projects and friends, Margaret sharing stories about the birds visiting her new feeder. Neither mentioned the adults who had created the chasm between them, both instinctively protecting their reunion from those complicated shadows. As twilight approached, Margaret reluctantly acknowledged the need to contact Elaine. "Your mom will worry if she calls Maria's house and discovers you're not there, sweetheart." "I know." Sophie's resigned acceptance suggested she had anticipated this outcome. "But I needed to see you, Grandma. I missed you too much." The phone call was brief and tense. Elaine's initial panic about Sophie's whereabouts quickly transforming to cold anger upon learning she was with Margaret. I'm coming to get her right now. Don't fill her head with your version of events. I would never burden Sophie with adult conflicts, Elaine. We've simply enjoyed each other's company. Margaret's response reflected her determination to maintain the moral high ground regardless of provocations. When Elaine arrived 30 minutes later, her demeanor was rigidly controlled fury evident beneath the surface civility. Sophie, wait in the car. I need a word with your grandmother. Once Sophie was out of earshot, Elaine's facade crumbled. How dare you encourage her to lie to me, to go behind my back? I didn't encourage anything, Elaine. Sophie arrived with our neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, who recognized her at the bus stop. I was about to call you when she explained her plan. Margaret maintained calm in the face of accusation. Perhaps you should ask yourself why your 8-year-old daughter felt the need to create elaborate plans just to see her grandmother. Don't you dare question my parenting. Elaine's finger jabbed the air between them. You've made your choice, Mother. You chose money over family. No, Elaine. Margaret shook her head slowly, the certainty of her response built on weeks of reflection and healing. I chose self-respect over exploitation. I chose appropriate boundaries over endless manipulation. And most importantly, I chose to stop enabling patterns that ultimately harm everyone involved, including you and Sophie. As Elaine turned to leave, Margaret added a final thought that had crystallized during their separation. When you reduce a relationship to financial transactions, you don't just impoverish the person you're taking from. You impoverish yourself as well, trading genuine connection for momentary material gain. I hope someday you'll understand that. Watching them drive away, Sophie's small hand waving from the window, Margaret felt the familiar ache of separation. Yet beneath the pain lay something new, a quiet certainty that she had finally found her authentic voice, after decades of silence, her true worth after years of being valued only for what she could provide. That evening, sitting on her back porch as fireflies began their nightly dance through the garden, Margaret started a letter to Sophie. Not an electronic message easily intercepted by Elaine, but an old-fashioned letter to be mailed to Sophie's school, where teachers would ensure it reached her directly. My dearest Sophie, she wrote, her penmanship careful and deliberate. Some things in life are too important to be measured in dollars and cents. Love is one of those things. No matter what happens between the adults in your life, no matter what you hear or don't hear, please remember that my love for you is constant, unconditional, and entirely separate from any material considerations. The words flowed easily from a place of wisdom earned through difficult lessons. As Margaret wrote by the soft glow of the porch light, an owl called from a nearby tree, its voice a reminder that night brings not just darkness, but its own form of clarity, its own particular wisdom that daylight sometimes obscures. 6 months after the confrontation at the bank, Margaret woke in an unfamiliar room. The curtains were different sunlight entered at a new angle, and the air carried the scent of jasmine instead of the stale perfume of sadness that had permeated her old house for years. Then realization dawned. She was in Tuscany, Italy, in a small bed and breakfast she had booked for her first solo international trip, paid for with her own money without asking anyone's permission. Margaret sat up, feeling the cool tiles beneath her feet as she crossed to the window. Beyond the terrace stretched rolling hills dotted with cypress trees, their silhouettes sharp against the morning sky. The landscape was exactly as she had imagined when planning this journey, yet somehow more vibrant, more alive than any photograph could capture. Like her, it existed in 3 dimensions, not flattened into what others expected it to be. The trip had been Emma's idea. The great niece she hardly knew had become a healing presence in Margaret's life, arriving unexpectedly 3 months earlier on a mission from her father, Peter, Margaret's nephew, who lived in Philadelphia. Aunt Margaret Dad heard about what happened at the bank, Emma had explained over coffee on that first visit. Aunt Linda told him the whole story and he was worried about you. He asked me to check on you since I live closer. Emma's forthright manner and genuine interest had been refreshing. Unlike most conversations with family members lately, there were no underlying agendas, no subtle manipulations, just authentic human connection. Their meetings had evolved from duty into genuine friendship, with Emma stopping by every Sunday afternoon. During one such visit, as they sorted through old photo albums, Emma had posed the question that would lead to this Tuscan morning. Aunt Margaret, what's one place you've always wanted to see but never did? The answer emerged without hesitation. Italy. George and I always planned to go when we retired, but the sentence needed no completion. Emma's fingers had flown across her laptop keyboard. Look at these small towns in Tuscany. The vineyards, the flower markets, the history. Wouldn't you love to see it all with your own eyes? Initially, the idea had seemed preposterous. Women like Margaret didn't travel alone to Europe. They stayed home, took care of others, waited for life to be generous to them rather than being generous with themselves. But something had shifted inside Margaret since that day at the bank. A growing recognition that the future wasn't infinite, that perhaps the greatest gift she could give herself was permission to live on her own terms while there was still time. When Elaine discovered Margaret's travel plans, the reaction had been swift and predictable. The phone call came as Margaret was packing folding newly purchased clothes into a suitcase that still smelled of the department store. "You're spending your retirement money on a trip to Europe. Mom, that money should be for emergencies. What if you get sick? What if you need expensive medical care?" "I have health insurance. Elaine, I have enough savings for any real emergency. And after 40 years of working and saving, I deserve to spend some money on my own happiness." "What about us? What if we need help while you're on vacation?" "Then you'll do what any functional adult does. You'll solve your own problems." Margaret had ended the call without further discussion. For the first time, she hadn't felt guilty for doing so. Now, sitting on the terrace of the bed and breakfast with a cup of authentic Italian coffee and a freshly baked cornetto, Margaret remembered that conversation and smiled. Below her, a green valley stretched out, dotted with ancient olive trees. In the distance, she could see other travelers beginning their morning walks. Some were young couples, others were families with children. But there were also several women Margaret's age traveling alone, and they all looked radiant with freedom. Her phone vibrated with a text message. For a moment, her heart raced, thinking it might be Elaine with some new family emergency designed to make her feel guilty for being so far away. But it was Emma. "How's the Italian adventure? I want to see photos." Margaret sent her a picture of the landscape and typed, "It's more beautiful than I imagined. I feel like a completely new person." Emma's reply came immediately. "You know what? I don't think you're a new person. I think you're finally being the person you always were, but never allowed yourself to be." The insight struck Margaret with unexpected force. Was that the truth? Had the essential Margaret, curious, adventurous, self-respecting, been there all along, buried beneath decades of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing? She walked to the village that morning, her comfortable shoes carrying her along cobblestone streets that had witnessed centuries of human dramas. The shops were opening shopkeepers, sweeping doorways, exchanging cheerful buongiorno with passing neighbors. Margaret practiced the few Italian phrases she had learned delighted when locals responded with encouraging smiles rather than the impatience she had feared. In a small grocery, she purchased fresh bread, local cheese, and sun-ripened tomatoes for a simple lunch. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with arthritic hands and keen eyes, counted Margaret's change carefully before adding a sprig of fresh basil with a wink. "Per il sapore," she explained, touching her lips. "For the flavor." This small gesture of generosity given freely without expectation of return brought unexpected tears to Margaret's eyes. How different from the transactional relationships that had dominated her life for so long, where every kindness seemed to come with invisible strings attached. Margaret spent the afternoon exploring a nearby medieval church, its walls adorned with frescoes depicting saints enduring various trials with serenity. One image particularly captured her attention, an elderly woman standing firm as arrows bounced harmlessly off her body, her expression peaceful despite the assault. The tour guide explained it represented unwavering faith in the face of persecution, but Margaret saw something more: personal resilience against attacks that could no longer penetrate. Returning to her room that evening, Margaret was surprised to find a message from Mr. Thompson on her phone. Why would the bank manager be contacting her during her vacation? Had something happened with her accounts? "Mrs. Reynolds, I hope you don't mind me calling during your vacation. I obtained your number through your great-niece Emma because I have news I thought you'd want to hear immediately." Margaret's pulse quickened as she returned the call, expecting some new financial crisis engineered by Elaine and Derek. "Vanessa and Derek came to the bank yesterday," Thompson explained after exchanging pleasantries. "They attempted to access another joint account they claimed to have with you, one we didn't know about during our previous situation." Another account. Margaret struggled to recall any other accounts she might have established with Elaine's name attached. "It appears that during your husband's illness, you added your daughter as a signatory to a secondary retirement savings account. It contains approximately $12,000. They attempted to withdraw everything, but our system flagged the transaction and contacted me." The revelation sent a chill through Margaret, despite the warm Tuscan evening. While she had been exploring Italy, reconnecting with her authentic self, Elaine and Derek had been plotting to drain yet another account she had forgotten existed. The bank confrontation hadn't been their final attempt, merely their most desperate one before seeking out forgotten financial connections. "What happened with the account?" Margaret's voice remained steady despite her internal turmoil. "We've transferred it completely to your name and removed all other signatories. The money is safe, Mrs. Reynolds. I wanted you to know that you have an additional $12,000 available for your retirement, or—" She could hear the smile in his voice. "Perhaps an extended European vacation." After thanking him and ending the call, Margaret stepped onto her small balcony. The setting sun painted the Tuscan hills in shades of gold and amber, a beauty so profound it made her chest ache. $12,000 more. Money she could use for more travel for art classes, for donations to causes she believed in. Money she could enjoy without guilt, because she finally understood a fundamental truth: she deserved to spend it on her own happiness. 2 weeks later, Margaret returned home with a suitcase full of memories and a clarity that no amount of therapy could have provided. The house that had once felt like both sanctuary and prison now seemed like simply a building walls and a roof that had witnessed her history but need not determine her future. The decision formed gradually, but with increasing certainty she would sell this house where she had lived with George for 40 years. Every room held memories, but also shadows of the woman she had been compliant, self-sacrificing to the point of self-erasure, afraid to claim her own space in the world. The realtor, a brisk woman named Janet, with efficient movements and practical advice, walked through each room making notes. "The market is excellent right now, especially for established neighborhoods like this one. With minimal updates, we should be able to list at a very attractive price." 6 weeks later, Margaret accepted an offer from a young family with 2 small children. The father, a surgeon at the hospital where George had spent his final days, spoke enthusiastically about the garden his wife planned to establish. "My son already spotted the tree that's perfect for a swing," he mentioned during the final walkthrough, his eyes shining with plans for their future. Watching them explore the house, Margaret felt no regret, only a sense of appropriate transition. This home deserved a new family, new laughter, new possibilities. Her life was entering a different phase that required different surroundings. She found a small cottage with a garden in a quiet neighborhood across town. Its previous owner, a retired botany professor who had created a masterpiece of native plants requiring minimal maintenance. The realtor had warned her about downsizing too drastically, but the moment Margaret entered the sun-filled rooms with their views of flourishing gardens, she knew she had found her place. The cottage cost significantly less than the proceeds from her larger home, adding substantially to Margaret's financial security. After the closing, she deposited the difference into her retirement account, a cushion against future needs that no one else could access or control. Moving day arrived with unexpected emotional clarity. Margaret sorted through 40 years of accumulation with Emma's help, deciding what to keep, donate, or discard. Each object carried memories, some joyful, some painful, all part of the tapestry that had brought her to this moment of transformation. "What about these photo albums?" Emma held up leather-bound books filled with family pictures, many featuring Elaine at various ages, from toddler to teenager to bride. Her evolution from innocent child to calculating adult, documented in chronological progression. "Those come with me," Margaret decided after brief consideration. "They're my history, even the difficult parts. Especially the difficult parts." The cottage welcomed Margaret like an old friend who had been waiting patiently for her arrival. She arranged her furniture, only the pieces she truly loved had made the transition, and hung artwork purchased during her Italian journey. Fresh paint in shades of blue and green brought the outdoors inside, creating a harmony between interior and exterior spaces that felt both novel and deeply familiar. 2 years after the confrontation at the bank, Margaret woke in her cottage on a Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains she had selected herself, illuminating walls adorned with her own watercolor paintings, a skill discovered in Eleanor's class that had blossomed into a genuine talent. The doorbell's unexpected chime interrupted her morning coffee ritual. Through the peephole, Margaret saw a familiar figure standing on her porch, but not the 8-year-old Sophie who lived in her memories. This was a taller, thinner version who had clearly grown considerably during their 2 years of limited contact. Her granddaughter was now 10, looking more like a pre-teen than the child Margaret remembered. "Hi, Grandma." Sophie's voice had matured along with her appearance. "Can I come in? I have something important to tell you." Margaret let her in, trying to control the mixture of joy and anxiety she felt. "How did you find me, sweetheart? Do your parents know you're here?" "Aunt Linda gave me your address," Sophie replied, settling onto Margaret's new sofa as if she had been visiting all her life. "And no, Mom doesn't know I'm here. I told her I was going to my friend Maria's house." She looked different, taller, certainly, but there was also something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A seriousness, a determination that painfully reminded Margaret of herself in recent years. "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." Sophie's green eyes locked onto Margaret's with an intensity that startled her. "Is it true that Mom and Dad tried to steal money from you at the bank?" The question hit Margaret like a punch to the gut. For 2 years she had waited for this moment, mentally rehearsed what she would say if Sophie ever asked about what had happened. But now, with Sophie sitting before her with that direct gaze, all her carefully prepared words vanished. "Who told you that?" Margaret asked, buying time. "No one told me directly," Sophie replied. "But I've been listening for 2 years. I've been listening to the fights, the phone conversations, the comments. They think I don't understand." She paused. "And I also found some of the letters you wrote me. Mom had hidden them in her closet." My letters. Margaret had written them religiously for 2 years, one every month, explaining in simple words that she loved Sophie, that the problems between the adults weren't her fault. She had never known if Elaine had given them to her. "What did the letters say, Sophie?" "They said you loved me. They said it wasn't my fault we didn't see each other. They said you hoped that someday we could be together again." Her voice broke slightly. "Why did Mom lie to me? Why did she tell me you didn't care about our family anymore?" Margaret took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, the moment she had both feared and waited for. Sophie was 10, but she had lived in the middle of this situation her whole life. She deserved an honest answer, age-appropriate, but honest. "Sophie, your mom and I had some very serious problems about money, adult problems that were very difficult to solve. But is it true they tried to take all your money?" She looked Margaret in the eyes. Margaret made a decision. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true." Sophie nodded slowly, as if that confirmation had given her the last piece of a puzzle she had been assembling for years. "That's why you don't live in the old house anymore. That's why you don't give us money for special things anymore. That's why Mom always gets sad and angry when someone mentions your name." "How do you feel knowing this?" Margaret asked gently. Sophie considered the question. "Confused," she finally admitted. "Because I love Mom and Dad, but I also know what they did was wrong. And it makes me sad that you've been all alone this whole time." "I haven't been alone, Sophie," Margaret said, and it was true. "I've been learning to take care of myself, and I've made new friends." She told Sophie about her painting classes, her volunteer work at the hospital, her new friendships. She showed her some of the paintings she had created and saw Sophie's eyes light up as she recognized some of the landscapes from photos she had seen online. "Grandma," Sophie said after a while, "I want you to know that when I'm grown up, when I'm 18 and can make my own decisions, I want to have a relationship with you. A real relationship. Not like before." "What do you mean, not like before?" Margaret's heart constricted at the perception of a child who had seen more than adults realized. "Before, when I came to visit, there was always something weird, like Mom wanted me to ask you for things, or like the visits had a purpose I didn't understand." Sophie spoke with a wisdom that broke Margaret's heart. "I want to visit you just because I like being with you. I want to get to know the real you, not just the grandma who gives gifts." They hugged for a long time. In that embrace, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope for the future of their relationship. Untainted by manipulation or calculation, Sophie stayed for 2 more hours. They walked through Margaret's new garden, where she showed her granddaughter the flowers she had planted and the herbs she was growing. They made cookies together, and as they mixed the dough, Sophie told Margaret about school, about her new interests, about the book she was reading. When it was time for Sophie to leave, she hugged Margaret tightly again. "Grandma, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Can you keep writing me letters? But now that I know where you live, you can send them directly to me. You can send them to Maria's house, and she'll give them to me." Margaret promised she would, and watched Sophie ride away on her bicycle, pedaling with determination toward her complex life, but with a new understanding of the truth about her family dynamics. That night, sitting in her garden with a cup of tea and her journal, Margaret wrote, "Today my granddaughter found me. Not the manipulated child I knew before, but a brave young girl who sought out the truth for herself. In her, I see hope that real love can survive lies, that authentic relationships can flourish, even after years of toxicity." She closed the journal and looked at the stars. For the first time in her life, the future felt full of possibilities, not obligations. She was 71 years old, and she was finally learning how to live for herself. The following spring brought unexpected news via a phone call from Elaine. Margaret answered cautiously, their communications having been minimal and strained since the confrontation. "Mom, I've been in therapy," Elaine began without preamble. "The court ordered it as part of Derek's gambling addiction case." Margaret absorbed this information silently, waiting for the manipulation that usually followed any personal revelation from her daughter. "I've been thinking about what happened at the bank. About everything that happened before that, really." Elaine's voice lacked its usual defensive edge. "My therapist says I've been treating you like an extension of myself rather than a separate person with your own needs and rights." The admission was so unexpected that Margaret momentarily wondered if this was another strategy, a new approach when previous methods had failed. But something in Elaine's tone suggested genuine reflection rather than calculation. "It's taken me 2 years to understand what you were trying to tell me that day," Elaine continued when Margaret didn't immediately respond. "About boundaries, about taking responsibility for my own life instead of expecting you to rescue me. I didn't want to hear it then." And now, Margaret kept her response neutral, neither encouraging nor rejecting this apparent olive branch. "Now I'm not asking you for anything, Mom. Not money, not forgiveness, not even a relationship if you don't want one. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself, trying to understand how I became someone who would hurt her own mother for financial gain." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, Elaine sharing details about her therapy journey, about Derek's gambling addiction treatment, about their marital counseling. She explained that Derek's legal issues had forced them to confront their financial dysfunction, leading to credit counseling and a structured repayment plan for their debts. Margaret listened more than she spoke, recognizing that whatever healing might occur between them would require time and consistent evidence of change, not just promises or momentary insights. "I'd like to see you sometime," Elaine said as the conversation wound down. "Just to talk, nothing more. But I understand if you're not ready for that." After careful consideration, Margaret agreed to meet Elaine at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between their homes where the public setting would help maintain appropriate boundaries. The meeting occurred on a bright April morning, the coffee shop's outdoor patio allowing them to enjoy spring sunshine that seemed symbolic of potential new beginnings. Elaine arrived precisely on time, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, rather than the designer clothes she had once prioritized over financial stability. Their conversation began awkwardly, both women navigating unfamiliar terrain, where manipulation and defense were no longer the primary currencies of exchange. Gradually, a cautious authenticity emerged as they discussed neutral topics, community events, books. They had read Sophie's progress at school. "She visits you sometimes, doesn't she?" Elaine's question came without accusation, merely acknowledging a reality. "I found a drawing of your cottage in her backpack." "Yes, she does. Usually with her friend Maria's mother driving her." Margaret maintained eye contact, not apologizing for the relationship she had maintained with her granddaughter. "I've never spoken negatively about you or Derek to her. That's a boundary I've respected completely." "I know," Elaine admitted. "Sophie told me everything after her last visit. She said you only talk about positive things, that you never try to turn her against us." She twisted her napkin between her fingers. "That made me realize how different I've been, constantly undermining your relationship with her, telling her you didn't care about us anymore." This acknowledgement of deliberate alienation, spoken aloud by Elaine herself, rather than merely suspected by Margaret, represented a significant shift toward honesty between them. They parted with no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful hugs, only a tentative agreement to meet again the following month. As Margaret watched Elaine walk to her car, no longer the luxury SUV, but a modest sedan reflecting their changed financial circumstances, she felt cautiously optimistic that authentic healing might be possible, even if their relationship would never return to what it had been before the bank confrontation. That evening, Margaret received an unexpected call from David Evans. They had maintained a friendship since the support group meetings, occasionally meeting for lunch or attending community concerts together. "I'm calling with some news, Margaret. I've been invited to give a series of guest lectures at universities in northern Italy this fall, Florence, Bologna, Milan. It's a 6-week program discussing international financial law. His voice carried enthusiasm that made Margaret smile. I was wondering if you might consider joining me for part of the trip. Not the lectures, of course, but the travel portion. Italy seems to have been good for you last time. The invitation hung in the air between them, representing more than just a travel opportunity. At 72 and 73, respectively, they had both navigated the painful terrain of family financial abuse, both rebuilt lives that prioritized self-respect over endless giving. Their friendship had developed naturally without pressure or expectation, built on mutual understanding and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. "I'd like that very much, David," Margaret replied after a moment's consideration. "I've been wanting to see northern Italy since my Tuscan trip. Florence has been on my list for years." As they discussed potential itineraries and travel dates, Margaret felt a quiet joy spreading through her chest. Not the desperate happiness of someone granted scraps of affection in exchange for financial sacrifice, but the authentic pleasure of someone whose life contained genuine options, meaningful relationships, and hard-won wisdom. 3 months later, Margaret sat in her garden, completing a watercolor painting of the cottage's flower beds in full summer bloom. Eleanor had suggested she submit work to a local art exhibition featuring senior artists, and this piece would be her entry, her first public sharing of artwork she had once been too self-conscious to show anyone. The finished painting captured not just the physical landscape, but something of Margaret's journey, the vibrant colors representing her rediscovered vitality, the open composition suggesting possibilities rather than limitations, the strong brushwork reflecting newfound confidence. As she signed the bottom corner with her initials, Margaret heard Sophie's bicycle tires on the gravel driveway. Their visits had become regular Sunday afternoon traditions accepted by Elaine as part of the new, more honest family dynamic they were attempting to build. "That's amazing, Grandma," Sophie exclaimed, examining the painting with genuine appreciation. "Are you really going to put it in an exhibition where everyone can see it?" "I am," Margaret confirmed, surprising herself with the absence of anxiety about public scrutiny. "At my age, I've realized there's no point hiding your light, even if you're not sure how brightly it shines." Sophie considered this statement with the seriousness that characterized her approach to adult wisdom. "I think that's true at any age," she finally concluded. "Mom's therapist says we should never make ourselves smaller to make other people comfortable." The insight coming from a child on the cusp of adolescence struck Margaret with its profound simplicity. How much of her life had she spent making herself smaller, her needs less important, her dreams less valid, her boundaries more permeable to accommodate others, and how transformative had it been to finally stand at her full height, occupying her rightful space in the world without apology. "Your mom's therapist is very wise," Margaret acknowledged, putting away her painting supplies. "And so are you, my dear. So are you." They spent the afternoon baking cookies from George's old recipe cards, Sophie measuring ingredients with scientific precision, while Margaret shared stories about her upcoming Italian journey with David. There was a comfortable rhythm to their interaction now, free from the underlying tension that had characterized earlier family dynamics. As they worked, Margaret noticed Sophie studying her with unusual intensity. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" "I'm thinking that you seem happy, Grandma. Really happy, not pretend happy like lots of grown-ups." Sophie's observation carried the unfiltered honesty of youth. "And I'm thinking that someday when I'm older, I want to be brave like you." "Brave like me." The description startled Margaret, who had spent most of her life thinking of herself as compliant rather than courageous. "Yes. Brave enough to say no when people try to take advantage of you. Brave enough to start over when things aren't working. Brave enough to be yourself, even when it's hard." The characterization coming from the person whose opinion mattered most to Margaret crystallized something essential about her journey. Perhaps the greatest courage isn't found in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet determination to live authentically, to establish healthy boundaries, to value oneself enough to require respect from others. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me, Sophie." Margaret's voice caught with unexpected emotion. Later, after Sophie had gone home, Margaret sat in her garden as evening shadows lengthened across the lawn. A gentle breeze stirred wind chimes hanging from the porch, a housewarming gift from Emma, who visited regularly despite her busy schedule at law school. The past 2 years had brought painful losses, but also unexpected gifts. New friendships discovered talents. A relationship with Sophie based on genuine connection rather than financial transactions. Tentative steps toward authentic healing with Elaine, and the possibility of romantic companionship with David that neither of them rushed to define or pressure. Most significantly, Margaret had discovered herself not a new self as she had initially thought after the bank confrontation, but her authentic self that had always existed beneath layers of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. At 72, she had finally learned that boundaries weren't selfish but essential, that self-respect wasn't luxury, but necessity, that her worth wasn't measured by what she gave others, but by the simple fact of her existence. As darkness fell, Margaret lit the small patio lanterns that illuminated her garden at night. Their gentle glow created a circle of warm light against the gathering darkness, much like the boundaries she had established, created safe space for her authentic self to flourish. Tomorrow would bring another day of possibilities. A watercolor class to teach at the senior center lunch with Eleanor to discuss the upcoming exhibition. A letter to write to Sophie with reflections from her day. Next month would bring another coffee meeting with Elaine, another step in their complicated journey toward potential reconciliation. In October would come Italy with David new landscapes to explore new memories to create. Margaret looked up at the stars emerging in the evening sky, the same stars that had witnessed her entire journey from young nurse to wife to mother to grandmother to finally herself. Their ancient light reminded her that it's never too late to change course, never too late to reclaim one's power, never too late to insist upon dignity and respect. The most important lesson of her journey revealed itself with crystalline clarity. The greatest gift we can give ourselves is permission to live authentically, and the greatest gift we can give others is the example of someone who refuses to be diminished by others' expectations or demands. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the gentle evening breeze against her face, savoring the profound peace that comes not from absence of conflict, but from presence of self-respect. At 72, her life had truly begun.